Good morning. My name is Andrew Newton, and my thesis topic is Make America Good Again, America's Need for a Common Sense of Virtue. A universal tendency of humankind is to complain. The average person complains about 30 times in one day. In America, complaints yearning for the ways of the past and grappling with the changes of the present are common. Statements such as, "The world is going to pot," or "Things aren't the way they used to be," and "Back in the good old days, this never would have happened," are frequently said and heard in everyday gatherings. While these complaints are often mere gripes about how new inventions change the old ways of life, or about how adolescents disrespect the elderly, they carry with them a universal truth. Anything created good will slowly decay into a lesser form, whether it is a building rotting, a painting fading, or a government devolving into a more despotic form. America's commitment to virtue and the values of truth, beauty, and goodness is currently undergoing this natural decaying process. Without a renewed commitment to virtue and the values of truth, beauty, and goodness, America becomes at risk of losing its identity as the land of the free and the home of the brave. On a dark, cold, and rainy night in 800 AD, a group of young men battled the waves of the raging Irish Sea. They carried with them a treasure so vital to its recipients that it was worth sparring with the seas. They struggled in their small rowboat, fighting to stay upright and at the same time protect the treasure that they carried with them. Worn and beaten, they painstakingly reached the shore the next morning. These young men knew that the journey that they had made would change the course of history. Cities, countries, and even civilizations would be forever impacted by their actions. These young men were priests of the Order of Iona, a small island in between Ireland and Scotland, and the treasure that these young men carried with them was far more valuable than that of gold, diamonds, or precious stones. It was books, classical and biblical texts that had been lost for centuries. After the fall of the Roman Empire, barbarians such as the Vandals, Visigoths, and Ostrogoths burned all texts in mainland Europe and in England. Europe, bookless and therefore cultureless, had fallen into a time period of illiteracy and poverty, commonly known as the Dark Ages. However, this tiny island's monastery went unnoticed and untouched by the barbaric peoples. The priests preserved all texts and manuscripts that they had, forming a compilation commonly known as the Book of Kells, waiting for the proper moment to reintroduce their essentials lost to the world. Because of these priests, core values of civilization returned to Europe. Ancient stories and traditions were remembered. Religion returned to a largely faithless continent, and scholarly ambitions and pursuits were once again realized. These priests brought about change that rejuvenated the exhausted and stale culture of ancient Europe. They resurrected and breathed life into a dead and stagnant society. In a similar vein, America currently experiences illiteracy in morality and in virtue. The philosophy of emotivism, while claiming to lift a burden, has erased reason and moral responsibility from America and has placed it into its own moral dark age. Once again, it is time for the bearers of truth to bring back the priceless treasure of virtue back to American soil and prevent it from losing its moral literacy. The terms of virtue, truth, goodness, beauty, and American virtue must be defined for this paper to have any meaning. Virtue will be defined as the practices, habits, and actions which cause a man to prosper internally and to benefit those around him. Truth will be defined as that set of morally driven principles that govern what a man should do. Goodness will be defined as the exercising of virtues, both in balance and in abundance. beauty will be defined as the quality of being created or designed with care and virtue. American virtue will be defined as that set of Judeo-Christian ideals which the Founding Fathers attempted to exemplify in their own lives and heavily emphasized in the founding documents of America. In the United States of America, and throughout the Western world altogether, the values of truth, beauty, and goodness have been disappearing. Scottish philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre is an expert on this major shifting of values core to Western culture. He describes this shifting as not a change in morality, but the loss of it. He states in his book, After Virtue, what once was morality has to a large extent disappeared, and that this marks a degeneration, a grave cultural loss. MacIntyre devotes himself to demonstrating the ways that morality has been lost and identifying its destroyer. Throughout history, great civilizations have thrived while their founding values remained constant. The fall of the Egyptian, Roman, and Holy Roman empires occurred nearly at the same time as a major shifting in their founding values. The Egyptian gods made way for the Greek and for the Roman gods. The Roman deities were replaced by the newfound religion of Christianity, and the Holy Roman Empire was undermined by the Protestant Reformation. America was founded on the value of the pursuit of virtue. Founding fathers such as Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson devoted years of their lives to transcribing how well they had been true to a list of virtues that they had compiled. This fervent dedication to virtue appears, at best, to be a minor issue to many of the media elites and few political leaders of present-day America, and the values of what is true, good, and beautiful are being undermined. If action is not taken to revert to the principles of the founding of America, one can only worry that the nation of America will follow suit in the same pattern as the other great civilizations before it. When the foundations of a house begin to crumble, the house itself starts to collapse. In the same way, without the ideals that America was founded on being commonly practiced and praised, America will descend into tyranny, anger, and conflict, and will ultimately dissolve or be conquered. The United States of America must recover a common commitment to American virtue in order to prevent its destruction. The United States of America has a unique form of government. It is not a pure democracy, nor is it entirely a confederated republic, nor is it solely a constitutional government. It is a unique combination of these three, combining the strengths of each, while also containing some of the weaknesses that these types of governments present. Specifically, democracies have been discussed by philosophers throughout history. French philosopher Montesquieu, in his Spirit of the Laws, identifies the quality that is most needed for a popular government to succeed. He says, "In a popular state, one spring more is necessary, namely, virtue. Without the spring of virtue flowing, the government and the state of a popularly elected government cannot and will not succeed." George Washington, in his farewell address, also stressed the need for organized morality and virtue, stating, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. When the government is elected by the people and controlled by the people, the character of the people determines the fate of the nation. If the people's morality is not grounded, resolute, and accepted, then the nation will fail." Philosopher James Fenimore Cooper, in The American Democrat, argues that the main weakness of democracies is that they are highly liable to popular impulse, and often, as a result, make rash decisions. He also proposed that democracies often substitute public opinion for law. In other words, a radically democratic government allows for hot topics and for fits of passion to entirely determine the direction in which a government treads. All these philosophers clearly emphasize the importance of the common people to excel on moral grounds in democracies. The ancient values of truth, beauty, and goodness are essential to the well-being of America. One of the main ideals today which threatens to tear apart our understanding of virtue is the philosophy of emotivism. MacIntyre dates this philosophy back to 1903 and names the founder as English philosopher George Edward Moore. In his work Principia Ethica, Moore outlines the three central claims of emotivism. He first claims that goodness is a single, undefinable property, not naturally occurring and differing from that of aiding survival or pleasantness. According to Moore, claims of actions having inherent goodness or badness are faulty and have no proof. They are merely intuitions. Moore's second claim is that every action is to be solely evaluated on the consequences of that action and compared with the other possible consequences of other possible actions. He then follows with a key and bold statement. No action is ever right or wrong as such. Anything whatsoever, under certain circumstances, may be permitted. This is commonly known in the realm of philosophy as utilitarianism. Moore's final claim is perhaps by far his most audacious. Personal affections and aesthetic enjoyments include all the greatest and by far the greatest goods we can imagine. This is the ultimate and fundamental truth of moral philosophy. These three claims of Moore's are all commonly accepted in the mass culture of society today, and as a result, the values of truth, beauty, and goodness have been corrupted. Truth is a concept that is highly debated. What is true? How can one be sure? Does truth even exist? These are all questions that are frequently asked in today's society. The first two questions are productive. They seek to increase understanding, to gain knowledge, to build up strong moral foundations. This last question, however, tears down progress and sets back our society. Across the country, in the media and in the elite, there has been a denial of truth itself, or at the very least, objectivity. This has been replaced with the modern ideal of your truth, a seemingly uplifting but ultimately detrimental ideal. You see, your truth is nothing more than your desires or your personal preferences. Personal preferences, whatever they are, have become the values that one should follow, because the self is autonomous and knows what is best for itself. This idea is countered by Professor of Christian Studies at Houston Christian University, Nancy Pearcey, in her book, Saving Leonardo, when she says, "It is not merely a matter of private individuals making private choices. Rather, it is about deciding which worldview will shape our communal life together. Feelings cannot be used as the primary source of morality, because feelings change on a whim, and often are wrong. Truth, then, is the first of the essential ancient ideals to have been corrupted by the philosophy of emotivism. Goodness has been replaced by the modern ideal of self-love. Many would argue that this is validated by the introduction to the Declaration of Independence, where Thomas Jefferson lists the pursuit of happiness as an inalienable right. However, happiness had a far different connotation in revolutionary America than it does in present-day Western culture. American legal scholar Jeffrey Rosen, in his book The Pursuit of Happiness, says, "Today, we think of happiness as the pursuit of pleasure, but classical and Enlightenment thinkers instead defined happiness as the pursuit of virtue, as being good rather than feeling good." With consideration of this fact, one can easily see how the original intention behind the Declaration of Independence has been radically shifted. Once the definition of happiness changed, the pursuit of happiness devolved from self-improvement into self-seeking benefit. C.S. Lewis argues in Mere Christianity that all humans experience a sense that differentiates between right and wrong and good and bad, called the law of human nature. They may not always follow this law of human nature, but when they do not, they make an excuse as to why they did not, rather than saying that there was no law in the first place. MacIntyre adds to this idea of Lewis's. And if the rules of morality are binding on all rational beings, then the contingent ability of such beings to carry them out must be unimportant. What is important is their will to carry them out. So then, the desire to emulate goodness is essential to an American and to America. Beauty is the final target of emotivism. The media has been riddled with messages of self-love, the embracement of living how one wants, and the need to listen to nothing but one's own desires. An excellent example of this can be found in the Disney movie Frozen. One of the two main characters, Queen Elsa, runs away from home and builds herself an ice palace, during which she sings, "No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free." While this may only seem like the joyous exclamation of a young adult experiencing liberty for the first time, it subtly conveys the message that the very concepts of right and wrong are in themselves oppressive, and that ridding oneself of them brings one greater personal happiness and is to be desired. The movies people watch, the books people read, and the music people listen to affect the worldview of a secular society almost as much as any other factor. Piercy specifically challenges Christian artists to revert the message of beauty back to the core gospel and to reveal the breathtaking beauty of salvation. Many would argue that pursuing virtue on the scale of an entire country is impossible. This is true. It is impossible for every single person in a country the size of America, or for any country that matter, to pursue virtue. Because of the sinfulness of human nature, it is impossible for even a single person to properly and completely pursue virtue. However, just because a goal cannot be fully attained does not mean that one should still not try to achieve the essence of that goal. Founding Father Benjamin Franklin devoted years of his life to examining how well he had been true to his list of 14 virtues. These virtues were temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and humility. At the end of his life, he said, "Though I never arrived at the perfection I had been so ambitious of obtaining, but rather fell far short of it, I became, by the endeavor, a far better and a far happier man than I otherwise should have been." It is important to realize that progress in the right direction is better than staying in one's terrible position. This pursuit of perfection shown by Franklin was and is quite deistic, and does not reach the full potential of perfection for Christians that can only be found in joint with pursuing and following Christ. However, this deistic pursuit of perfection is still beneficial to an American and to America. Others would argue that the very idea of common virtue represses the freedom of religion ensured by the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. However, it is entirely possible to pursue the individual components of a religion or moral philosophy without specifically adhering to that religion or moral philosophy. The biblical concepts of the Golden Rule, caring for the elderly, being humble, and many passages in Proverbs are all commonly accepted in secular society as wise. One of the core tenets of Christian virtue can be found in the biblical book of Galatians. These virtues listed by Paul are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, and are collectively known as the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is commonly praised, even among the irreligious. However, The secular definitions of these words are vastly different than the biblical definitions of these words, particularly love, joy, and peace. This difference is dangerous to the need for a common sense of virtue in America. Many emotivists would argue that the concepts of truth, goodness, and beauty are too vague to be able to pursue. They would dismiss these as goals because they have no true definition of these terms and consider them to be subjective. Emotivist thinkers would instead argue that truth can be found in two main areas. The first is the scientific theorems and discoveries accepted by the general public. However, our understanding of truth and our foundation of truth must be constant, and our understanding of science is constantly growing and adapting. Leading scientists up until Copernicus and Galileo universally agreed that the sun orbited circularly around the earth. This is now known in multiple ways to be false. Furthermore, the accepted diagram of the model of an atom has changed consistently every few years over the last century. Science continuously builds on itself and is not constant. The last step of the scientific method is to retest and compare results to that of the previous conclusion. This is essential to understand. Although science's constant change to become compatible with new information is excellent and essential, it makes for a poor foundation of truth. The second avenue of truth proposed by the emotivists is the individual beliefs and experiences of an individual. While it is undeniable that truth can be relative to the subject, truth does not and cannot rely on the subject. So-called subjective truth is mere opinion, not truth. Ultimately, the bearers of morality must bring the priceless treasure of virtue back to American soil before it loses its identity and its security. The ancient values of truth, beauty, and goodness have been mocked, corrupted, and belittled in modern intellectual theory and society. Only a return to the striving for a morally excellent life can reverse America from its stage of moral decay. If the United States fails to seek to emulate the goodness with which it champions itself, it will also fail to retain its greatness and prosperity. As the philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville so aptly put, America is great because she is good. And if she ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. Thank you. I would now like to take questions from the judges.
Andrew, what a great smile. Everybody just feels so relieved when they get finished. That was such a wonderful job, and your paper is so good.
Thank you.
So my question to you, you're a legacy student here, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So in your paper about making America good again, there seems to be a renewed interest in classical education. Do you feel that classical education can help with this, and if so, how?
I would certainly agree and believe that. I believe that my classical education has taught me the importance of this, and that in classical education, we are taught to not only look at what, but why, and to perceive what is true, what is good, and what is beautiful in everything. And so I believe that in our country, that's more important than anything else, because the country we live in is going to shape how we live. So I believe that my classical education has certainly planted that desire in me.
Good. Thank you.
Ms. Cheney
Good
took
job.
my question.
That's why I went first.
So I know. I want to ask one that digs down a little more specifically into the same question. Specifically at a classical school, how does when you take classes on civics or philosophy of government or anything that comes out of the mouth of Mr. Clay, how do you see that contributing to solving the problem that you write about?
So if you couldn't tell I think it's fairly obvious that Mr. Clay's class influenced quite a lot of my paper with the supplemental readings that we did.
Yeah.
Almost all of the Enlightenment and ancient philosophers began with the discussion of the laws of nature, and that typically begins with the interactions between humans and what is right and what is moral and what is virtuous. So I definitely believe that in the classical education, the ancient philosophers teach us to first of all seek to be good citizens through being virtuous.
Thank you.
Andrew, phenomenal job. You did incredibly great research. I love the how you grasp McIntyre, by the way, because
Yeah.
he's not easy. I guess one of the questions I have is, it seems like some of the examples you gave, Rome, Egypt, America, prosperity tends to weaken the love of morality. I'm curious if you've thought anything about that as you're writing the paper, or anything you'd speak to with that.
Yeah, so I definitely would agree with that. I think that's why I named the title of my paper, Make America Good Again, because I believe that as a country today, America tends to focus a lot more on its greatness and how it appears externally to those around them than the actual things that are inside this country and the goodness and the improvements that need to be made to this country through virtue. And so I certainly believe that when countries start to focus on prosperity more than virtue, that's when they start to experience collapse.
Appreciate that. One more question. So your title comes from, is a derivative of our president's election slogan. And our president has created some interesting things in regard to your topic. I'm curious to what degree you've thought about how we choose our leaders and the influence of this on that, and vice versa. Yeah.
So that's a great question. I mentioned in my paper that virtuous people are more likely to elect virtuous leaders because virtuous people are often more focused on values and the prosperity in a way of long-term survival, not necessarily money. And so I believe that virtuous people are going to be far more likely to choose virtuous leaders than people who aren't thinking about pursuing virtue.
I really appreciate that. I'm going to ask one more question at the risk of asking too many questions. So you talked about the Iona community and how saving critical literature was part of what led to Renaissance and revival of society. I'm curious, what do you think's the potential to do that today for our society?
So I believe that starts today with individuals pursuing virtue. There's an excellent illustration in the TV show The Chosen, and the opening credits or whatever, and it has a bunch of gray fish swimming in one direction, and then you see a bunch of light blue fish swimming in the other direction. And you pay attention to those light blue fish because they're going the opposite way that everyone else is. And so I believe that it's important for us to be those so-called light blue fish from The Chosen in our pursuit of virtue, and to draw the attention and attraction of others. And so then they are going to begin to wonder, why are these people pursuing virtue? And do I need this? And I think the answer is yes.
I really appreciate that. And along those lines, I think you and your classmates have a remarkable opportunity in the next 4 years especially, but really throughout your lives, to be those blue fish. So I'm excited about your life and how God's going to use you in that way.
Thank you very much.
Andrew, this is excellent work. It's a Herculean task to take on Alistair McIntyre as your main source in high school, and you did it not once but 3 times through. I did it once with you over the summer, and if you recall from our conversations, we talked a lot about this bridge that McIntyre wanted to build. It kind of became a cipher between us. We talked about the bridge, McIntyre's bridge. He didn't get to finish building it because, unfortunately, this is the tragedy of it. He died the month that you started working on this.
Yeah, he died about a month after I chose him as my main source.
Right. Well, we're hoping the mantle has been handed to you. But he also became a Christian before he died, and so that raises questions about the nature of this bridge. And so, just in terms of just for context, we're talking about a bridge from Aristotelian classical a system of virtue to today, and via a kind of pluralistic setting that happened, with the Athenian shift. Maybe talk about that a little bit. But what does that mean for today? The fact that he did become Christian. What kind of bearing would that have if he had written a sequel, or if you write the sequel? Then what's that going to look like?
Okay, so that's a very big question, and it's going to take a little bit to unpack. But one of the main focuses of After Virtue by Alasdair MacIntyre is a contrast between the Aristotle's tradition and his virtues, and Nietzsche sees criticism of those virtues and saying that we only had fragments of them, and as such we could not use them. MacIntyre proposes that a bridge is needed between Aristotelian virtues and our modern society. He doesn't say what that is in his book After Virtue, but I think we can reasonably infer that that bridge is Christ. MacIntyre himself became a Christian about a year and a half after writing this book. And any sort of attempt to explain philosophically the origins of morality or virtue without God are never going to succeed, because God is the creator of morality. He's the creator of virtue. He's the puzzle piece that makes everything fit together. And so any attempt to try and explain morality and virtue without him is always going to fail.
Well said.
Okay, I'll go. I just have a real quick question. So yesterday, just by coincidence, I saw a short clip of an interview with George W. Bush, and he was being asked, the question he was being asked is, what will bring our country back together again, or something along those lines. And his response was, well, I'm not worried about the future of our country at all, because our country has been through so much, worse times, better times, that sort of things. What would you say to him, kind of based on what you're talking about?
I believe that as president, his job might have been a little different, because he had to deal with 9/11 and things like that, and wars were very in the present for him. But for people who do not have the title President of the United States, I believe that it's very important to focus on making ourselves ready for the future. I would say that pursuing virtue and trying to convince others to pursue virtue for the sake of the country is one of the most important things that we can do.
Thank you, Andrew.
If there are no further questions, thank you.
I have one other thing. Your answer to Dr. A's question was really interesting. And what you said is actually a large part of what was behind the morality of New Testament. So, they longed for virtue back then, but they didn't know how to get it always. And so the fruit of the Spirit offered them a route to that. So anyway, well done.
Thank you.